Okay, open back up to Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1. Continuing our series in which we are looking at God's story, which we have said along the way is the story of the ancient Israelites, and it's the story of Jesus Christ, and it's even our story. We're finding our place in God's story, and we're enjoying the study, and we're calling it the way out because of how it points us clearly and directly to Jesus. This morning's title is Pharaoh and You, Moses and Jesus, and that will make sense as we move through. Before we read some of the text here, let me remind you of the context. We have the Israelites, the Hebrews, living in Egypt as slaves under Pharaoh. Last week we talked about Pharaoh burdening them with labor, working them to the bone, oppressing them. And we talked about their need for deliverance and how they had no strength, no power, no ability to deliver themselves. Well, this morning we picked the story up, and they are, despite all those challenges, they are still multiplying. They are growing, they are spreading, they are flourishing there in Egypt. And that is troubling Pharaoh even more. So, adding insult to injury, not only is he putting them to this slave labor, but he also has this maniacal, evil plan. And so we're going to read about that, starting in verse 15. It says, "Then the king of Egypt," that is the Pharaoh, "spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah. And he said, 'When you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth, and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it's a daughter, then she shall live.'" Stop there for a moment. It's pretty shocking, right? If it's a boy, kill it. I mean, imagine that. I mean, pure evil. Continue reading. "But the midwives, these Egyptian midwives, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, 'Why have you done this thing and let the boys live?' The midwives said to Pharaoh, 'Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get to them.' So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. Because the midwives feared God, he established households for them." Pause again. So despite these orders, through these midwives, God spared the Hebrew children. Now look what happens next. Pharaoh doubles down as the Israelites continue multiplying and more children. Verse 22. "Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, 'Every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive.'" I mean, it's hard to even imagine the depth, the scope of pure evil involved in this. It forces us to ask the question, I mean, what would possess someone to do this? What could possibly possess someone to do this? Well, I've got to tell you a little bit about pharaohs and what they were like. Okay, and I have a graphic here of a pharaoh, okay? And there were many of them. Of course, when the sons of Jacob ended up in Egypt in the first place, through Joseph, there was a Pharaoh who favored them. who took care of them. But here we are many, many generations later, and the Pharaoh who is in power now sees the Israelites as a threat. And so he has called for not only their slave labor, but the execution of their newborn sons. Really extreme. What were these people like? I mean, did Pharaoh just wake up one day and decide to be an evil monster? I mean, was it that simple? Well, of course not. It wasn't that simple. You've got to know something about these pharaohs. You see, they were all extremely arrogant and competitive. In the succession of pharaohs, they would often compete with their predecessors. They knew how many victories, how many buildings and pyramids. They knew the size of the harem, all the women surrounding the pharaoh which preceded them. And they often competed to try to get for themselves more. They wanted their kingdom to flourish more. They wanted more military victories. They wanted more successes. They wanted more women for themselves. It was competitive. It's like athletes today breaking the record of one who went before them. I'm a basketball fan, grieving the loss of our Celtics season from last night. Some of you know what I'm talking about. I was thinking about players like LeBron James, who when he entered the league had the number 23. Well, who wore 23 long before LeBron James? MJ, Michael Jordan. Another player, Kobe Bryant, at one point changed his number to 24. I don't think that is insignificant. We see these same types of things today. This is what they were like. I learned in researching what it was like for these pharaohs. I also learned that they would have inscriptions and hieroglyphics in their palaces, in their temples, and they would often display their military conquests with those pictures. And not only that, but they would exaggerate their gains in terms of their gains of land or their conquering of other nations. They would exaggerate, and they would leave off, they would edit out their losses, their failures, kind of like an ancient version of social media, where we all curate, put our best foot forward, put the good stuff out there, and delete the bad photographs from our phone. We don't share those. I mean, an exaggerated form of the very same thing, common to humankind. The pharaohs were tremendously powerful and also tremendously fearful. Because when you're in a position like that, and you see yourself, and they saw themselves as godlike, as possessors of immortality, as even dispensers of life to their people. So they saw themselves as extremely important, and every success of that kingdom reflected back on them, and every failure reflected back on them also. So they had to have success. They were powerful and they were fearful. Pharaoh would have been the scariest man in the kingdom, and in an ironic twist, also the most scared. The most influential, and at the same time, the most insecure. Isn't that fascinating to think about that? So much so that in his mind, he can rationalize and justify the execution of little baby Hebrew boys. As we considered earlier, I mean, did he just decide, he woke up one day, I'm going to be a monster? Or was it a way of thinking? Was it rationalization? Was it, I have to do these things? Even probably justifying it in the name of taking care of his people. After all, I mean, if the Hebrews grow and their influence spreads, then they may upend this whole thing. And what would become of our Egyptian people if I allow that to happen. So he has to do something, even if it means something that dastardly and atrocious. That's what he did. Stunning. And yet, God preserves his people. Now, for a moment, I want us to think about this because it's easy to talk about Pharaoh and think about what he was like, and we could even be filled all these years, thousands of years later, with outrage. But I want you to ponder for a moment how we are like Pharaoh in some ways. Now, I know you and I don't have this level of influence, power. We don't. We are all different in the scope of what we get to involve ourselves with, different spheres of our lives. But I want you to just please consider with me how we are all like Pharaoh in that we too are obsessed with ourselves. If we say we're not, we're lying. From the moment we wake up in the morning to our last conscious moment at night before falling to sleep, we are preoccupied with ourselves, are we not? With our own security, with our own prosperity. It's natural to us. We too have tremendous insecurity. We try to hide that from people. We don't like it when that surfaces, but it's true. We're insecure. We're competitive. We compare ourselves with others on a regular basis. We're preoccupied with ourselves. We're blinded by our own pride. We're addicted to control. We can be petty, can we not? In our insecurity. We can exaggerate threats. Someone says one thing, or we overhear something, and we immediately in our minds begin forming a narrative of this intrusion of some sort, this opposition of some kind. And we immediately begin thinking, what can I do about it? It's that voice of Pharaoh. We talked a little bit about it last week. It's that voice of Pharaoh in our own minds. The voice that tells us, you and your exaltation and you getting your way, that's what matters most in life. That's what's most satisfying. It's the voice that tells you you're way more important than people realize. Why don't they give you the credit you deserve? Why aren't they as thankful as they ought to be? Why can't they just see it the way you see it? Because the way you see it is the best way to see it. It's the insecurity of, I got to stay on top. And if someone else is rising in my presence, how can I keep them down? How do I preserve my place? It's the taskmaster inside that says, you got to work harder to make your mark. You got to lift yourself up and demand that people value and respect and esteem you. It's that sort of thing. It's the judge that says, well, how dare they do such and such, whether to me or to someone or something I value. It's the condemnation that echoes through our minds, whether aimed at ourselves or aimed at other people. It's all based in this elevated sense of our own importance, as if everything revolves around us. And it is burdensome, dark, miserable, and enslaving in its own right, isn't it? So I have another graphic here. I'm calling this Stickman 2.0. So some who have been in the Wednesday night studies or other studies have watched me draw a little stickman on the board. And I had a primitive version on the keynote display that I was working with, and then I once again turned to my new friend AI with which I have a complicated relationship, as we've talked about before. And I said, well, let's just see if I type this in, what it spits out. And it spit that out, and I go, oh, that's perfect. So just bear with me for a moment. This is Stickman 2.0. This is you, this is me, okay? Again, we can think, well, how in the world can we compare ourselves to some ancient Pharaoh? Well, just think about your life and the things that matter to you. Your home, your office, your workplace, whatever that looks like for you. Your church, this church, or if you're watching online and you often attend somewhere else, wherever your church is. Your health, your finances, what you enjoy in terms of fun or leisure. Like, you have these aspects of your life. And you attend to them, and you are preoccupied with them, aren't you? You are. We all are. And we have expectations for them. And what happens when there's some intruder? What happens when someone tampers with one of these? Don't we often react? Doesn't opposition rise from within us? Don't we fight to maintain the balance or the equilibrium of our stuff? Isn't that our natural instinct? We are not pharaohs, we are not kings in the literal sense, but we do have these spheres of influence in our lives that are important to us, and our pride does surface on a regular basis. And if you think it doesn't, may God send you some intruders. Sometimes those intruders are adorable. When you have your own children, they're so cute. But as time goes on, as they threaten your sleep or your resources or your sense of peace and quiet or whatever it is. I mean, isn't it something that's so common and so natural and so normal, humanly speaking? It is. Now, this is awesome. There's a plot twist in this story, and really in the Bible in general. A significant plot twist. Look ahead for a moment to the end of chapter 2. We're going to go over what's in between. But just for a moment, if you look ahead to the end of chapter 2, probably the most powerful verses in this entire section here in terms of chapters 1 and 2 is right here at the end of 2. Beginning of verse 23, it says, "Now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them." These few verses here help us to appreciate this radical plot twist in this way. This Old Testament story about the children of Israel suffering in Egypt, an actual geographical location, historical events, a historical Pharaoh, all true. They were there, and they were being oppressed with all this labor. And they needed deliverance, and God is going to raise up a deliverer in response to their cries for help. He's going to help them. He's going to set them free. And here's the plot twist. As we move to the New Testament, this is what we see. That the dangers and threats which are external in the Old Testament are internal in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it's God taking care of his people, naturally speaking, physically speaking, giving them food and water and protecting them from enemy nations, and in this case, freeing them from the Egyptians, actual people who were harming them. It was physical. But when you come to the New Testament, what you learn is that God is interested primarily in spiritual deliverance. And what it looks like to be prepared for spiritual deliverance, it's to have the outcry of your heart be, God, set me free from the Pharaoh within. That's the plot twist. Even as we went over these different details, and I have the graphic there, and I hope that you were able to think about your own life and relate to some of that. As we talked about that, you may have the temptation in your mind, think, okay, whoa, I got to put an end to that. I got to put a stop to that. I got to manage this. Let me take every category, figure out every source of friction or struggle or whatever, and just let me put it to rest. Let me put it to bed. Let me take care of all these details. Look, that's not what this passage is teaching us. What God is unfolding for us is His plan to do what we could never do for ourselves, to set us free, because we have no ability, zero ability to free ourselves. We are no more capable of freeing ourselves from that spiritual Pharaoh within than the Israelites were to free themselves from that physical Pharaoh who was oppressing and beating them to oblivion back then. It's the voice of Pharaoh within, demanding that we work. As we've said so many times, look, it is good to have responsibilities. It's good to attend to every one of those areas. But what it is it's not the physical work. That's not the problem. It's the spiritual work that just says, I got to do more of this. I got to be better. I got to secure myself. It's that stuff that's just enslaving and oppressive. It's what keeps us up at night. It's that part of it, which most of us, and I think I would dare say all of us, know well. It's that stuff. I read recently where they say over 70% of Americans who are adults, who are adulting, to use the verb of that, who are adulting, have some form of ongoing, consistent, chronic bodily pain that is related to stress, hypertension, headaches, stomach aches, sleeplessness. I mean, those things sound or feel familiar probably as you're sitting there right now. You're like, oh, it's funny, you mentioned mine. Maybe it's a whole smattering of those. But this article was talking about, and it said something along the lines of like 70%. And I said, it might be closer. I mean, I'm no statistician here, but it might be closer to like 100% once you pass a certain age. Because in our bodies, physically, we feel the stress that occurs in that spiritual pursuit of I got to do better, I've got to get more, I've got to control these people, and I've got to get certain outcomes for myself. I mean, we suffer, don't we? We suffer. We're enslaved. And so like the Israelites, we cry out, they sigh, they cry out, deliver me, help me. And it says God heard their groaning. God remembered His covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel. God took notice of them. He remembered them. He knew them. He's the deliverer. Well, there's more to consider here. We're going to talk about now Moses and Jesus, okay? Moses and Jesus. And we'll move fairly quickly through this story, just make some observations along the way. But God now raises up Moses to rescue them from the Pharaoh of Egypt, and we will see, I have another graphic here. Thank you, AI. We will see that Moses points us to Jesus as we go through these, okay, one by one. Would you just observe with me, chapter 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. Now pause there for a moment. I mean, this is amazing in a stunning way, in a scary way, but these two parents, these Levites, they're in the priestly line. They have this son who's beautiful, whom they love. And if you have a child, many of you have your own children. Maybe now you have grandchildren. You know instantly, you lay eyes upon them and immediately you love them and you think to yourself, I would do anything to protect this child. That is just our instinct. They love this child. And for 3 months, knowing that they have this edict of the Pharaoh, his decree that's looming over them. They can't enjoy having this little baby boy because they are terrified that any moment an Egyptian soldier could come in, take their child from them, and execute that little boy. I mean, can you even imagine living through that? I mean, some of us have had to live through hard things in the early days of our children when they were really young. Even something like a miscarriage that's so painful. Jill and I had one miscarriage, and it was painful. This has gone on for 3 months, every day. Terrified that someone might take your child. It tells us in the book of Hebrews chapter 11 that Moses' parents trusted God, and thus they did what they did. They bring this child in this little makeshift little flotation device and just put him by the Nile River. Remember, the Pharaoh had said the children were to be executed in the Nile River, and they go and present Moses there. By faith, perhaps not able to live any longer with that stress and burden of uncertainty, offering this child to God, saying, Lord, please do something. So Moses is there in this little basket, floating there in the Nile, and his sister, who was probably maybe early teenager, we don't know for sure, but they speculate, commentators do, that perhaps in her early teens, she's there watching to see what would happen. Even think through what that would be like. Look at verse 5. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile, with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. Then she opened it, and she saw the child. Behold, the boy was crying, and she had pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then Moses' sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? I'm sure thinking of Moses' mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go ahead. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, because I drew him out of the water. As we saw last week, God is the God of the details. It wasn't just coincidence that the daughter of Pharaoh just happened to go to the Nile River at that point in time, at that spot on the Nile River, which is rather long, and encounters this little baby, immediately knowing it's a Hebrew, and having pity, having compassion, and even allowing Moses' mother to tend to him until that point in time when she turns the child back over to Pharaoh's daughter so that Moses will be born into, in a sense, or be taken into Pharaoh's household. There are many parallels here. We'll just consider a few of them. One is that both Moses and Jesus were protected at birth. You may recall in Matthew's gospel, there's a story about Herod. When he hears that the king of the Jews has been born, he plots against the Hebrew children. In fact, he knew the prophecy, he knew it was to be in Bethlehem, and he called for the execution of every male child under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. He had to put a stop to that. Similar to the Pharaoh here in the book of Exodus, he was threatened by another king. And so he too rationalized and justified murder of baby boys. Both protected at birth. Moses and later Jesus. Both looked upon the work of their people and wanted the freedom of their people. Notice what it says next, verse 11. Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up, so many, many years later. He went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. This is Moses like a vigilante, taking justice into his own hands, because he was raised in Pharaoh's household. He was, in one sense, an Egyptian, but naturally speaking, ethnically, he was a Hebrew, and he had this loyalty and even this desire for the freedom of his people, the Israelites. And so he takes matters into his own hands, and he murders an Egyptian here. Getting ahead of God's plan, but nevertheless a foreshadowing of what God will do. He looked upon the labor, literally it says that. Their hard labors he saw, and he acted. Jesus will look upon our labor, the spiritual kind of work we've been talking about, the burdensome, enslaving, dark, empty, deadly stuff. Jesus looks upon us, doesn't he? Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Jesus says, "I came to give sight to the blind and to set the captives free." He too sees the labor of his people. As we quoted last week, Romans 2 says, "The works of the law are written on our hearts." We need to be saved from our pride, from our greed, and from the most commonly chosen tool to try to fulfill our greed, which is works of the law, the stuff that we can do to secure for ourselves spiritual life. The foolish endeavor we all engage in, naturally speaking, from which we need rescue. We are enslaved to the works of the law, and later in Romans 10 it says, Jesus is the end of the law for righteousness for everyone who believes. There's only one way out. There's only one way off that treadmill of self-salvation. It's not you. It's not me. It's Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. As per our Exodus series, He is Himself the way out. He's the deliverer. He's the rescuer. We can trust in Him. He looks upon our labor. He has mercy on us. He knows what keeps us up at night. He knows what causes us the greatest stresses in life. He knows the anger. He knows the anxiety. He knows the greed. He knows all of it. And He has mercy. Another parallel, both are shepherds. Look at what happens next. Just jump ahead. In between, we have Moses trying to mediate between two Hebrews who are fighting, and they make an accusation against him, and then he flees. He's like, I got to get out of here. And then it says in verse 15 that Pharaoh heard of this matter. That is, he heard that Moses had killed an Egyptian, and Pharaoh was familiar with Moses. He was raised by his daughter. And so it says he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" So they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds. And what is more, he even drew the water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why is it that you have left the man behind? I mean, do something for this guy. Let's get him something to eat or something. Invite him to have something to eat," he says. Moses, verse 21, was willing to dwell with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses, as was somewhat customary back then to arrange this marriage. Verse 22, then she gave birth to a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." I mean, notice that Moses here acts as a shepherd, even defends these women and takes care of them when they're being mistreated by the other shepherds of their own people. Moses intervenes, and they view him as an Egyptian, which is also relevant, and we'll talk about that in a moment. For right now, just appreciate his compassion, his service offered them as a shepherd, acting like a shepherd. Can you think of another shepherd? A greater shepherd? The chief shepherd to come? Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He brings me to green pastures, still waters, restores my soul, takes care of me. Well, these are foreshadowings of that greater shepherd to come, the greater Moses, Jesus, who rescues us not just from our physical hunger and thirst, but more importantly, our spiritual hunger and thirst, which is what really keeps us burdened and enslaved. Both are mediators between two worlds, as we've talked about a little bit. Moses had this unique distinction in that he was both, ethnically speaking, a Hebrew and also an Egyptian, having grown up in Egypt, familiar with their customs, knowing the ins and outs of their kingdom, but also having a heart for his people and bridging the gap, becoming a mediator for them to set them free. And once again, we have these parallels. Doesn't Jesus look upon us in the spiritual Egypt we live in, so to speak, this barren wasteland that's dried, where there's no water, where there's exhaustion and labor and suffering? And Jesus, the Son of God, comes from heaven to earth. Jesus, who is a dual citizen, both divine and human. He comes to meet us where we are stuck, to set us free. Jesus being prophet, priest, and king. He's a priest, like Moses, born of Levites. So this is the beginning of what God is up to rescue his people, because he knew what they were going through. He saw them. He heard them. He remembered his promises to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He was not asleep at the switch. Everything's going according to plan. All the details, to include Moses being taken into Pharaoh's house. He's going to set his people free. Just a few more thoughts. We've talked about the voice of Pharaoh that echoes through our minds. You must be more. You must get more. Those thoughts, desires, motives that manifest themselves in our hostility against others. I see this in my own life. I see this countless times with the people I'm counseling and shepherding, that the most destructive things relationally are those dark lusts that we protect and justify and rationalize. I have found that in my own heart and my own mind, I am a very fearful person, and that other people are as well. I find myself in a situation frequently, I'm going to talk about my German Shepherd for a minute, I hope that's okay, where I'm having to explain to people, I'm sorry he comes on very strong. Sorry he reacts this way. If I'm walking him around the neighborhood or whatever, so, oh, cute dog, like, hey, sorry. And I have to explain, he's afraid. And they're thinking, he's afraid, I'm terrified. Who's the one that should be afraid here? He's got teeth. Like that. I can see him right now. It's weird, but it's true. And if you watch these reality shows about dogs, troubled dogs, there's some good ones out there, they will talk about how they are fearful. Even and especially when they don't need to be. How often are we fearful? And other people bear the brunt of that because we're trying to protect. Remember the little orbs surrounding the stick person? It's got to be a certain way. Don't you dare change it up on me. Don't you dare take away this or that I need. God says that's what's keeping you a slave. And you need a Savior, a rescuer, who will come and lay his life down. You need a real king who is miraculously selfless. A servant, one who loves and cares for, provides for, and tends to, and shepherds his people for their good. Even to the point it costs him his own life. We need that kind of rescuer because that's not our nature, is it? We need someone else. We don't need more gumption, more discipline, more exertion. We need someone else. I mean, the world is constantly telling us the problem is outside of you. It's those people, it's that stuff, it's whatever. And the solution is inside of you. Or it's in this drug you take, whether prescribed or illegal, or whatever. Like it's the solution is what you're going to do. The gospel tells us the exact opposite. The problem, the greatest problem, the deepest problem, the most dreadful problem, the most dangerous problem is inside of you. It's sin. It's the almighty I. It's the Pharaoh within. And the solution is outside of you. It's Jesus coming to rescue you. Amen. Who says, I have mercy on you. I see you in that misery, and I want better for you. I have compassion on you. Come and listen to the truth that sets you free. So sad. And this has been for far too long in my life. My interpretive grid of Scripture, which is nothing more than me projecting onto God the way that I am naturally, which is the work. And you hear preaching and you read books from all these Christian authors, and it's all about you and it's all about what you got to do. And it just keeps you a slave to the works of the law written on your hearts. And Jesus says, I've come to set you free. Believe. And Paul says, as you receive the Lord Jesus, so walk in him. How is that walk? The righteous live by faith. And this whole story, as we walk along, we will see God is providing for his people. He is showing himself faithful. He is showing that, listen, you live because I see you and I hear you, your cries, and I'm attending to you. Before they even knew it, he was raising up Moses. He sent Jesus thousands of years ago to take care of us in the deepest, most profound way. He's our rescuer. He's our king. And it's not through our efforts that we experience this freedom. It's through beholding. It's we look and we live. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians, beholding the glory of the Lord, beholding Jesus Christ, his perfection, his love, his selflessness, his glory. It's beholding his glory that we are transformed from one degree of glory to another because we're trusting in him and not ourselves, and our root problem is our trust in ourselves. That's what put us to death in the garden. That's what's been bearing the fruits of death ever since. And the good news of the gospel is that Jesus Christ has come to set you free. He lived for you. He died for you. He rose for you. And he says, just trust me. Because I live, you will live also. And that's not just you get to go to heaven when you die, though that's true. It's that you have a restored relationship with your Creator because he did everything necessary. Slavery is to be apart from him. Freedom is to be in union with him. Death is to be separated from him. Life is to be bonded to him. And through Jesus, you've been bonded to him. Why? Because as he's foreshadowing in this story, that many thousands of years ago, he would send Jesus to come and set captives free. So we get to be free. God is not like us. He is not vengeful, vindictive, controlling. He is not a taskmaster. He is not demanding. There's nothing you could ever give him that he doesn't already have anyway. He created you because he's gracious and generous. As I read recently, I love this quote. God did not create you because he had a U-sized hole in his heart. He created you to give you life, to allow you to share in all the blessings of his creation, and most of all, to be known by him and to know him in return. That's why he made you. And through Jesus, you are restored to that relationship. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life.